There is much talk, I would say, in the last week in particular of Manchester City's very possible treble, and discussions are happening and parallels are being made with 99, and Manchester United obviously have a chance in an FA Cup final to stop their worst nightmare happening. So I can't fully work out if this is just my age and my stage of life, or if it really is just a far less vibrant, romantic, interesting run at what is still an awesome achievement in the treble. So it feels like it was such a different time in the 90s post the ban and Manchester United's never-ending odyssey to win. So it was a more exotic thing to win in Europe. You had Arsenal, who were double winners in 98 and therefore a very seasoned rival, whereas the 2023 version, admirable as they are very much the rookie. Also, like, there was, like Manchester City in particular and Liverpool for a period of, just made a science of winning domestic games routinely. Like, United had 79 points that treble winning season. They drew 13 games. They lost 3. They might finish third by recent standards. So there was just more jeopardy about so many of their games. And then I guess the other obvious point, and maybe that's where this is where the lack of romance comes in, is money. And it's not to suggest that United were plucky underdogs in 99. I mean, they plundered the league. They looked at Dwight York and said, we'll take that. And they take Andy Cole and they take Roy Keane and they buy Jaap Stam. So, but it is different to this state-backed project. And so 99, and I'm sure non-Manchester United fans are spitting on the ground as I say this, but 99 had the feel of a certain romantic Holy Grail type achievement, whereas this will feel, I think, like the culmination of a well-executed project, albeit their failures in Europe in recent years adding a certain desperation to the situation. So am I being terribly unfair on Man City?
No, I think, look, I suppose, if there's people, I don't know, teenagers now, how would they feel about it? To me, it feels like the treble thing has almost crept up on us, even though it's obvious that it should have been there all along. I think there's probably a few factors where probably, even in some ways, people don't think of FA Cup in the same way as they did even then, potentially. I take your points about the Arsenal Manchester United thing. I suppose Man City, like Manchester United, there's a great sort of, listen, there's probably more romance because of the history, and none of that will annoy Man City fans, but clearly the Manchester United pursuit of the second European Cup, the second Champions League was a big thing, and they'd had all these sort of heartbreaking near misses. Now, in fairness, City have had near misses in recent times, but they've been more so sort of funny, calamities because of maybe a view of the project, whereas I suppose Manchester United 99 as well, the Premier League wasn't the behemoth that it is now, in the sense that it was buying everyone and everything. Like, it was still the time when you could win that and then sell a player to Real Madrid a couple of years later, some of your elite players. So there was a sense like that, even an English club winning the Champions League was a bit of a deal when you consider what the sort of mid to late 90s and sort of Juventus and Ajax and various sort of games. So I think that's probably part of it as well. I mean, in recent years, you've had all Premier League, Champions League finals. So I think there's layers to it. I mean, you can't get away from the obvious. I mean, it is the City thing. I mean, it is, you enjoy their football. I love watching them, but then you step back from it. And of course, the whole project is very clinical and very sort of modern football, in the sense that if you have enough oomph behind you from a petro state, you will get there. So to me, it's not as if Man City's success is intertwined with their climb to the summit. You can't really intersperse it with Peter Reid's team getting relegated, or sorry, Alan Ball's team was getting relegated that time, or playoff finals, because it's two different clubs. Whereas maybe the Manchester United story at 99, there was some kind of link there, the Busby to Ferguson, the same office in the corridor or whatever at the start. It felt a lot more joined. But there is a little bit of your own personal experience there, because you had a fondness for Manchester United at the time. And
I was young. I was so young.
No, you weren't as beaten down by the world.
I think that's
as
true.
You are now.
Jonathan Wilson is with us. Evening, Jonathan.
Hi, how you doing?
We'll get to Arsenal City. Care to weigh in on the soon to be discussed ad nauseum parallels between '99 and Man City's tilt in '23?
I mean, you're absolutely right that there was no sense then of the Premier League as the richest league in Europe. Every season Premier League teams should win the Champions League. If you look at the finances, they outstrip everybody by miles, particularly post-pandemic. That just wasn't the case in 98-9. That when they played even those group games against Barcelona, they felt like enormous, epic games. Every time they played an Italian team, so they beat Inter in the quarterfinals, is that right? And then before Juve, those felt like massive. I mean, I remember even a couple of years earlier when they beat Porto 4-0 at home.
And that was like, I remember the build-up to that game was like, can United do it? And 4-0 was being talked about. It was one of the great results in the history of English football.
I mean, I say this with I'm not a Manchester United fan in any sense, but I remember at university sort of rushing down to the common room to read the papers the next morning because it felt like such an extraordinary night for English football. There's none of that now. And that statistic that side only got 79 points. City could get, they should get 95, 97 points this season. The league is just so stretched that no individual component of this treble, if they do it, feels anything like as significant as the equivalent 20 years ago. So, I think it's sort of in terms of a spectacle, we're fortunate that City are on the side of a draw they're in the Champions League. That Real Madrid, whether they win or lose, that should be a great game. It should be a big game.
Yeah,
playing Bayern in the quarterfinal. I think 4-0, it didn't feel like a 4-0 game. I think the fact that they did beat them 3-0 in the first leg, that was a really good performance. It wasn't the sense of walkover that you got, for instance, in the FA Cup semi-final against Sheffield United. You compare that to United's game against Arsenal in 99. We will always, people who were alive at the time will always remember that semi-final in 99. It was such a amazing game, a missed penalty, the Giggs goal. Was it Bergkamp who missed the penalty?
Yeah, Roy Keane sent off.
Roy Keane sent off. Just incredible drama between two great teams. Or 3-0 walkover against a team from the Championship in front of a three-quarters full Wembley, because some people can't be bothered to go because they're so familiar with, in City's case, so familiar with being at Wembley, and in Sheffield United's case, because they just they looked at it and thought, no way we're going to win this. Let's save the money for being in the Premier League next season.
I think it will be very interesting to see how, let's say it happens, how a Manchester City treble is greeted. Again, 99, it was the climax to this Ferguson odyssey, and even the most hardened begrudgers, I suspect, could have acknowledged that the drama of the win against Barcelona had a certain kind of magic or majesty. Whereas if City win, particularly because the finale might be a fairly resounding win against one of the Milan sides at a canter, and Premier League in the bag with 110 charges hanging over them, there could be a real shrug of shoulders from the masses, which really would highlight the ills of where football is at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And this is not just to do with state-run projects, and not just to do with City and the way they've gone about it, but the way that the wealthy clubs have pulled away from the rest. Their victories in league games, in FA Cup games, just feel so routine now. And just the way that the finances generally European football have gone, that you have this very small clutch of super clubs with PSG and Bayern and Juve and Barcelona, Real Madrid winning a title pretty much every season. Obviously, Juve have messed that up recently. Bayern may end up messing up this season, but fundamentally, the seasons when those teams don't win the league really stand out. Well, City could make it 5 out of 6 this season, and so you sort of think you look at the Premier League and say, well, there's 7 big teams going for those top 4 places. But actually City are ahead of them all. It's always City. And the thing I think that's really, quite apart from the moral aspects of Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia with Newcastle, which we probably shouldn't set aside, but even leaving that aside, the thing is with a state-run club, there was two aspects. So one is, if a rival appeared and challenged them, they can always spend more money. They can always find another state-run company to give them a bit extra in sponsorship. they can always find another airline or oil company or Abu Dhabi PR company or whatever who will sponsor them for something. They don't have the same ceiling that non-state-run clubs have. And I think even more worrying is they're essentially unregulatable. And you saw that when UEFA brought the charges. We'll see what happens to these 115 Premier League charges. But they have the wealth to employ the best lawyers and to drag out these cases forever, to just, to make them last as long as possible, to financially cripple the governing bodies of the sport. And we saw with the Saudi takeover of Newcastle, the revelations in the last 2 or 3 weeks about how involved the British government was in making sure that happened. They were desperate for Saudi investment. We suspected that at the time. There was those odd meetings involving Boris Johnson, which I think Miguel Delaney was the first person to highlight them. But we've seen much more evidence of that in the last 2 or 3 weeks. There clearly was Premier League influence. How is the FA or the Premier League meant to somehow act as some arbitrator in ongoing negotiations between the British government and the Saudi state or the UAE? It's not their role, and it can't be their role. And how can they possibly face that down? And if you have clubs that are essentially bigger than the league they're in, I mean, it's gone. It's over.
See, Dan, I knew it wasn't just because we were younger.
No. I mean, listen, it's a lengthy list of reasons to feel that way. And it's funny, even when you mention it, the whole Premier League investigation thing, again, that almost slipped from the mind as well. You think, oh yeah.
Well, I think to a degree because it wasn't a Man City winning the title by March and there was nothing else to talk about. It has just fallen down the news cycle because we have a legitimate Premier League title race. But I think if City are to canter away, if they win tomorrow, I do think it re-emerges in the final few games.
It comes back, pretend if there's a coronation.
I mean, the slight problem, one of the reasons it's not part of a news cycle is that nothing's happening at the minute, or nothing we can see. The process is not transparent. Who knows what's happening? There's been very odd rumours out of Manchester recently that City think they've got away with it. I've got absolutely no idea about the validity of them. And the thing is, we've got no way of checking because the process is not transparent. So who knows what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, I'm actually curious because you obviously see it online, and particularly maybe Miguel and a couple of others who've been active on Man City, and they get a lot of sort of grief back from irate Man City fans. But I'm just curious, I haven't been in a couple of years. What's it like to go to City these days, the stadium? Is it a joyful place? Is it a sort of sense where it's sort of heaving with that sense of this is a golden era we're living through? Or you obviously do hear criticisms of the atmosphere from other fans of other clubs. I'm just curious, what type of venue is it to visit with all the atmosphere around it that we've sort of laid out there?
I mean, I think the I don't think it's that different to other clubs. I mean, it's not Anfield on a big European night, but what is? It's not Celtic Park on a big night. It's not that. But I think it's very easy to get seduced when you look back, and this is maybe where nostalgia does play a part. That we remember the really big nights, we remember the really big atmospheres. When Liverpool were battering everybody in the 80s, some of their crowds were actually pretty low. I mean, I know that was a time of particular economic difficulty in Liverpool, but Anfield was great then for the big European nights. But you got a run-of-the-mill league game, and it felt like a run-of-the-mill league game, and a lot of City games now feel like run-of-the-mill league games. But they've happened for every club. So I think the sort of point scoring among fans is, it's pretty parochial and pretty partisan. I'm not never that convinced by these ideas that certain fans are somehow noisier or more dedicated or whatever. City win the league quite easily, so a lot of the league games are quite easy, and those games don't feel particularly intense. But that would be true of anybody.
Jamie Vardy has raced through like it was 2016 all over again and finished very nicely for Leicester. So it's 1-1 at Elland Road. We're into the 80th.
Yeah, it's well deserved in the run of play as well. Leicester have had, from what we've seen here, they've had some good opportunities. Jonathan,
with a view to tomorrow night's match then, what's your read on the creaking of Arsenal of late?
I mean, I've been trying to avoid saying that they've bottled it, but they've bottled it. I mean, it's not as simple as that. Yeah. It's to do with squad depth, and again, I'm very reluctant to sort of say, it's all Rob Holding's fault. But would they have let in 7 goals in the last 3 games if Saliba had been there? Probably not. And so, yeah,
I feel like
this is not.
I feel like, I mean, like Rob Holding, I grant you, but I feel like Gabriel has just been further exposed as a constant mistake waiting to happen. No.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think there's been problems in midfield as well. But I think really it's Holding is a symptom of that lack of squad depth. You know, there's been all this talk sort of, from not in the last fortnight, but the sort of few weeks before that of, nobody thought Arsenal could challenge for the title. Yeah, well, this is why, because the squad's not deep enough. And we're really seeing that now. And I think you're seeing, Holding is getting the grief for that, and that's not really fair. But and he's been physically dominated by Mikel Antonio. He really struggled to deal with Alcaraz as well. But you think, Saliba really struggled with Ivan Toney in that Brentford game. And that Brentford game was where I think the first real signs of vulnerability were there. That the set plays, Brentford really troubled them. If you look at set plays, Arsenal hadn't conceded a goal to a cross set play all season up until that Tarkowski header for Everton, in Sean Dyche's first game as Everton manager. And from that moment, and I think probably it was the Brentford game that had alerted people to that weakness, everybody just starts bombing in swinging corners. And Ramsdale's not great at dealing with that. And I think there's been 3 further goals from set plays after that Tarkowski goal. And that, I think, is a big worry for them. I mean, quite apart from everything else, with City just better. But set plays, City are much more dangerous at this season, partly as a result of Haaland. I think if they had, I think it's 5 league goals they've had from set plays. But then you think of the game against Leipzig, where 4 of Haaland's 5 goals were, 3 of them came from set plays. One of them was a penalty, which was the result of a set play. So City are much sharper on set plays than they have been traditionally. Arsenal are weak on that, so that's another problem. But sorry, I drifted off there because I was talking about Saliba getting physically dominated. But I think you've also seen other problems in the squad. That Thomas Partey's form has dipped the last 3 or 4 weeks. Odegaard's been, I mean, he played pretty well the last 15 minutes against Southampton, but before that he had a pretty poor game. The second half at Anfield, I thought he was pretty poor. So there's players all over the place who've had issues. When with Xhaka having the illness, Vieira just doesn't look the same level of player. So it looks like Xhaka probably will be fit for tomorrow night, but will he be fully fit? We're not quite sure. And you sort of think, well, if Holding's been physically outmuscled by Mikel Antonio, if he struggled to deal with Alcaraz in the way he did, how does he deal with Haaland? Is there another option? And you think, well, do they go to a back 3? But I mean, they just haven't done that all season. And when they tried to do that late against Liverpool, it didn't really work. And also, part of the problem is they don't have any centre backs, so you can't go to a system that needs more centre backs. So I suspect if Tomiyasu had been fit, which he's not, he might have come into the middle as somebody who is a good man marker. But I wonder if there's an argument for playing Ben White in the middle and playing Kieran Tierney on the right. And I know it's Tierney's wrong foot, but the advantage of that is when Grealish cuts in field, it would be onto Tierney's stronger foot.
Yeah.
And Arteta was concerned enough by Grealish in the game at the Emirates that he played Tomiyasu, not Ben White, from the start in that game. And obviously it was, turned out to be a mistake, in that it was Tomiyasu's mistake that gave City the first goal. But that seems to me the only way they can deal with that or change something to try and deal with the Haaland issue. But I think just the way the teams are playing, it's very hard to see anything other than a fairly simple City win tomorrow night.
It does feel that way, not least because City have just found that settled, brilliant form that looked a touch elusive for parts of the season. Around the time Cancelo was being bombed out of the club and there were wobbles, and Guardiola was making slightly odd comments about the attitude of the team in the media. Bernardo Silva was hanging out at left back. All of these issues have just kind of drifted away, and they look like a mean machine, very settled. Pep looks far less likely to do something particularly enigmatic as pressure comes on. They look really, really good at the moment.
Yeah, they do. I mean, and I think part of those, the slight issues they had earlier in the season, they're only really problems by their own incredibly high standards. I think a lot of them were trying to accommodate Haaland and work out how to sort of balance the control that Guardiola wants with his requirement to play a bit more direct, to get the ball forward quickly. And they have worked that out now. It's slightly surprising by effectively playing 4 centre-backs across the back. But Stones is obviously more mobile than that. Akanji's more mobile than that. And Ake's more mobile than that. The injury to Ake could be a problem for them. But they don't have any left-backs. They've got Sergio Gomez, but he hasn't started the Premier League game. So I doubt he'd play him. It'd probably be Laporte, who's another converted centre-back. You think that Saka maybe can get a run at him, and maybe that could be somewhere where Arsenal could have joy. But he's got to get the ball first, and I just think City's midfield is so good that Arsenal will really struggle to get meaningful possession.
Jonathan, thanks so much for the time. Enjoy the game tomorrow.
Cheers, thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Jonathan Wilson with us on the line.